Okay, so we're here. We're having the interview with Pawel Sasko finally. This has been a long time coming, Pablo. I know we've been talking in DMs for like, I don't know how many years. And I remember
Couple.
you were also on one of the podcast episodes when we were doing the Cyberpunk community podcast. I don't know if you remember that, but
I do.
I
It was
think
2018. Yeah.
2018, yeah, I think that's
Yep.
the first time maybe someone had heard the cow story. You went into the cow story, so we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But I know people want to hear about that. But first off,
Sure.
how have the last few months been? I know it's been maybe a roller
Oh,
coaster of emotions. You've probably taken a million flights at this point because I see you in across the world
yeah.
every other day. It feels like. So yeah, let's hear about that.
Yeah, man. I practically like live in a airplane nowadays. I just like walk into airport. I know everyone. I'm talking about the crew that is flying. I
Yeah.
recognize the planes. It's been like this. I mean, to be honest, like last couple of months have been just really intense effort, just to finish Phantom Liberty, and then 2.0 patch. For a long time, the players, you guys, you didn't know that we were sort of doing two things in the same time,
Hmm.
almost, right? Like, because in one way you were trying to make this 2.0 as well as possible, and it was just, like a massive sort of blanket back fixing across the whole game, outside of just doing features, right? Because like we did features, but outside of that we've been fixing shit on, man. So that was like one thing. But then, the Phantom Liberty, right? Like we all knew that this new content needs to be good, for the players to really feel that they have something to come back to, and it's valuable and makes sense, for the players to come back to. So that was really it. And the last couple of months have been just intense efforts, both 2.0 patch and then Phantom Liberty all together. A lot of flights all over the world, really, to just like, because we've been having the Phantom tour, right? Like
Of
we've been
course,
in
yeah.
couple places. Like I had a pleasure to, of course, be in Warsaw, but outside of that, I was in Korea and Seoul, and I was also in London. So
Hmm.
like I've been flying there, and there was also a couple other things that we have done, just showing the game to players, to journalists, and whatnot. So just all of that, it was just, from the plane to work, to fix things, to talk with my teams, to review things, to check stuff, back to the plane. It was like that. So the last couple months have been really intense.
Have you been getting adequate sleep? I'd imagine no.
Well, I mean, I would say in that time, not really. No, I was just, it was really intense. It was maybe not just me doing like insane hours of work, but it's really just me being like all the time on the go when it comes to like just travel and
Right.
constantly doing something or working on something, or preparing for something. So, but that's been a bit of time, so it's much calmer nowadays. But as always with us, we are never always completely calm. There's always something new that you're
Sure.
working on.
Sure. Yeah, and I know you're
Yeah.
also you're also heading to Boston, right? So have you been working on the move for that as well? I know you've been kind of back and forth.
Yeah. I have to like make sure that sort of like everything's ready for my move. So it's just, things like, visa, and things like renting the place, and things connected to the studio, and all the paperwork, all the contract stuff, and also like kind of finishing up and wrapping like my life in a way here in Polish side. So that's also like almost like simultaneously I'm trying to do that. It's yeah. I'm
Big
just
undertaking.
probably not putting enough attention on that, because like for me, always like sort of my goals in work and like whatever we're building is first, and then my life is second in a way. So it's been mental.
Fair enough. Okay. Well, let's start from square one. Let's hear how you got started in the game industry. Let's hear about the cow story, and then maybe a little bit about your childhood and how you
Oh,
grew
my
up and how
cow
you
story. Oh
the
god.
cow story. We got to hear it. We got to hear it.
The cow story. Well, I mean, I really wanted to be in game dev. Like I think like there was I didn't really have a computer like as a child, so I couldn't really play games. I never really played games because I didn't have a PC or any console, whatsoever. And again, I was born in Polish mountains, so that was also not the richest environment. Let's call it like this. So obviously, for me, like the main thing was just work on the fields, right? And one of the things I was doing, I was, outside of just working with my parents, just normally like in a way on a farm. We had like a small kind of farm thing in the mountains. Like outside of that, we had cows, and ducks and chickens and all kinds of things. Actually, and I had 2 cows, 3 cows at the beginning. Then later we had 2 cows. So yeah, that was my thing, that I was always taking them for pasturing. And thing was that, I never really knew how to play video games, right? Like, because that was not something I ever did. So what I was doing, I had this bag with like magazines, and there was a legendary magazine at that time in Poland called Secret Service. So Secret Service was like this really old Polish magazine. They were writing like great reviews, and all kinds of things, in regards of games. So at the time I was buying that as a kid, and every month sort of taking the back with those magazines. All of them I've read many, many times, right? And I was just going with that bag and just like sitting in the grass, with my cows around me, and just reading, right? Just reading about how you play games and all of that stuff. And one of my cows, she was called Kalina, and Kalina was always like sneaking behind me, because like it's funny because like if you ever had cows, that the cows, what they do, they like lift their heads really really high up and try to like sniff the wind. And when they sniff the wind, they kind of feel, from which direction sort of the rain is gonna come and so on. And they always knew that. So she was always like sort of walking around, sniffing the wind. And when I was reading, I never knew where she exactly is. I was just lifting up my head, looking around. And she was very often sneaking behind me. And like for her, like one of the funniest things was just licking my head or my neck or my Secret Service. That was her thing. So she was sneaking behind me and just tried to like lick me or the magazine. And, the cow's tongue is really thick
Long.
and hard.
Yeah.
It's like actually like if you ever felt it, it feels like a rag, for like cleaning your shoes when you enter someone's apartment. It's like that like hard and sturdy in a way. So like always when she just licked me, I was like, oh God, so that was the story. And this is that was how it started really. Like I really just imagined how you play games, reading those magazines, man. That was really my beginnings. And I was just spending time just in my mind, like thinking how you play video games, and looking at the pictures of screenshots, because you never really had in the magazines pictures of people playing games at the times. YouTube didn't exist. You didn't have, so you couldn't really watch videos of people playing games because that was not the thing that you could do. So like, I didn't know how to do that, but I saw how the games look like right on the screen. So that was interesting. And those games in my mind have been like insane. Like you could do so many things and stuff. And later, when I get my first computer, when I was like, I think 16 or 17, I don't remember anymore, but it was something like this. When I got my first computer, I kind of I tried first computer games, and then I was like, okay, I get it now. Now I understand how you do it. And in a way, it was different, but it was fascinating. It was just, I would say it was so much better than what I thought it's going to be. You know what I mean? And yeah, this is how it started, man. Just for me, like dreaming about that stuff. Another thing, like what put me on a trail to start writing really was my mom, actually. She asked me the question because I told her when I think I was 14 or 15, and we were actually digging potatoes, on like in my farm, and we were like digging potatoes, and I was like collecting the potatoes to the buckets and so on, and working there with my mom. And I was telling her about the book I'm writing, and I was like 14, I think, or 15 at the time. That book was fucking terrible. It had like, I finished it. It had like 570 pages, right? Like,
Wow.
it was a really thick book. It was like a fantasy story about like fucking everything and anything. It was just going all over the
Hodgepodge.
place.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was but again, like as a kid, I didn't really know much different. Like I just read a bunch of books and that was everything, right? But I literally loved it. So my mom, knowing that majority of writers, like, well, not let's say renowned writers, but people that try to be writers, don't really have nothing to put into the nothing to eat, don't have a bread to put on the table. You know what I
Starving
mean?
artists. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sort of. So my mom looked at me and she was like, maybe you should write like screenplays, like for
Hmm.
movies. And I was like, huh, I never thought about this as a kid. And I was like, maybe I should. And then like sort of like planted a seed. And that sort of combined with that games that I was playing and reading the magazines and whatnot. And that sort of made me think, wait, so there are those games that have like so much story in it and all that shit. Maybe I could write that. Would
Yeah.
that work? So in a way, that was the beginning. Really, that was the beginning. When I was like maybe 15, 16. Both reading about it and then hearing my mom like kind of suggest that, and it made me think. That's how it started, man.
That's awesome. Yeah, no, that's writing such a lengthy book at 14 is like crazy. I'm doing like NaNoWriMo right now, so I
Mhm.
understand. This is my first shot at writing a novel, and it's a lot harder than I thought it would be. So, props to you for writing a 500 plus pages at 14. That's insane to me. Um,
Yeah, my PC burned, so I fucking lost it. Like, it would be actually probably quite fun to just like
public,
see it or like
yeah.
release it for free to people so that they can have a laugh with me. But I honestly, I lost it because my PC burned, my hard drive burned. I
Oh
had no
no.
backup because it was a long time ago, right?
Yeah,
Like you
yeah,
didn't have a cloud, you didn't have a Google Drive.
sure.
Like you backed it up on other drives, and I didn't, obviously, because I didn't think about that. I was just a kid, right? So for me, it was like whatever.
Lost in the ether forever. That's unfortunate, but okay. Let's jump to the next question here. What movies, books, shows made a big impression on you growing up that you've kind of carried
Oh,
with you, and has that inspired your game dev route? Like, what are those few things that pop
wow.
into your mind?
Interesting question. I mean, there's loads. There's really loads of them, but I'm thinking like what would be the most like. I mean, to be honest, like I was really an avid reader, and like this is how I
Mm,
started. Also, like just because like in a way I didn't have access to sort of movies and games as a kid, so like the books were everything to me. So I was just reading books, and in my library we had this thing that there was like a contest of who reads the most books a month in a way, and
mm,
what class is reading the most books. You were gathering points, and for those points you were getting something. I don't remember what, but it wasn't anything big. It was just like I don't know, a cake or something from the school, for a whole class or something that you could get. But I was reading a lot, and I think like there's a couple things I would bring up probably that really like made an everlasting impression on me. And I would bring up two writers, I think, at first. And one of them, there will be no surprise. It will be Andrzej Sapkowski, actually.
mm,
I remember reading actually Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, and I read that one, and it was basically suggested by the librarian that was working in our library. Because again, no internet, right? So I didn't know, what good books are. I couldn't like Google that, right? Like what are the good books to read. So I was asking the librarian, like, what are the good books to read? And she told me, you should try this like, Lord of the Ring thing. And I read it, and I was like mind blown. I read it in Polish at first, and then later I read it in English. But at that time, I couldn't speak English as well, and read. So I read it in Polish. I was mind blown. So I came to her and I told her, okay, I need something that is like this, but not exactly like this. Just kind of like that. Like, do you have something like that? And then she suggested a couple of things, and it's sort of like it always stayed with me. And it was Andrzej Sapkowski and The Witcher books. This was the time when I actually read it first. Like she suggested it to me, and she was like, "You should definitely try this." And she basically advertised it to me as like Polish Tolkien. She said, "It's
yeah.
like Polish Tolkien. You'll like it." And I was like, "Okay, let's try it." And I loved it. And I read it, and I was like, "You know what? This was actually even better than than the Tolkien actually himself." I was like, "This actually." works even better, speaks to you even more. So I read like all the 6 books, and then the or the 5 books, and then the short stories. So I asked like, what more? And then the second one that she suggested was actually Frank Herbert and Dune. And that one was like, that really knocked my socks off. Like, so I always like remembered those two, which is like Sapkowski and like whole Witcher, and then Frank Herbert and Dune. Those, like, I love those two. Those like just amazing long, stories with so much depth. It took me like really long time to read it, and in a way I kept going and looking for something that will be a similar quality, and I will find something that will be, or leave a similar mark in me. And like, I love the language, especially in Sapkowski, because it was in Polish, so he was like, it was just, his language. I was reading his language, so I understood it. Frank Herbert, at first I started reading in Polish, but then the translation, I didn't enjoy the translation too much. I was like, the language is not that great. So I asked the librarian, and she told me that I actually have to then start reading in English if I really want to get the real one. So I think from like the book number 3, I think I switched to English, which actually made it so difficult to make the connection, because so many things were translated in a way that I didn't know what they were actually referring to, because English name wasn't exactly the way how the Polish was. So I kind of got lost a bit. But after like, I think reading like one of them, I caught up and finished reading in English, Frank Herbert. And I really loved that one. So I kept searching, and the last one, again, this wasn't a suggestion from Hare, because it was already later when I think already in high school. So we had computers, we had first internet, you could check stuff. So I Googled that, and I found this guy. He's a Polish writer, Jacek Dukaj. So he's the guy that he's called almost like a new Lem. I don't know if you heard about Lem, Stanisław Lem. He's an old hard science fiction Polish writer from like 80s. He wrote like a really fantastic books, but I didn't really enjoy them this much. We even have a couple of those books, like we read them in school as one of the things you have to read, sort of to pass almost exams and stuff. So it didn't leave like too much of an impression on me. Like later, when I was older, when I read them, I understood more. So I was like, okay, now I get it. But at that time, it was too difficult for me. But sort of like when I was in high school, Jacek Dukaj, he was called like a guy that is almost like a hair of Lem. And I was thinking about this, and I started reading this. Man, he is so fucking insane as a writer. Like this guy, this is probably the best writer I've ever read anything of. Like imagine, for instance, The Black Oceans, Czarne Oceany in Polish. It's such an insane book. It's a book that happens, it's about like economical change in a 22nd or 23rd century already. You are like far off forward. The language is changed. You are speaking with almost no pronouns, because you are kind of this being that is not male, not female. It's like something else, in a way. It's so far forward, and the ideas these guys have. Like, I remember this one short story from Dukaj that I can like tell you like a glimpse of the way he thinks, because this guy is blending the religion, the philosophy, and the literature together. And this is I think it's a 22nd century, and it's a short story, one of the short stories from Jacek Dukaj. And it's about the fact that you have this, there is a official document from Pope, who basically, it's called bulla in Polish, which I don't know actually how we call it in English. Like those are those official documents from Pope when he's actually changing in a way the sort of the religion. And he basically says that the aliens that have been discovered in last century, they actually do have soul. And when they die, they actually can go to heaven. So this is what the book is about. It's about this religious, in a way, sort of change of like what to do and how religion sort of copes with the fact that aliens are real and they were discovered, they were actually conscious, and the Pope had to deal with that. So he wrote this, it's called bulla in Polish. He wrote this document to acknowledge the existence of soul in them, And this is what the short story is about. It's so mind-blowing and eye-opening, the way how this guy writes his books. So he wrote numerous books that I really love. But the thing is there that stayed in my mind is this like very unique blend of religion, politics, economy, and like literature coming together. And it's always hard science fiction. It's always like 22nd, 23rd century, like things move forward so much that we don't even think about them. Like there are completely different like paradigms they think about, paradigms
Right.
they think about. So it's mind-blowing, man. So anyway, long conversation, but those are the books. Like when it comes to games, it's always gonna be Baldur's Gate 1 and 2, and it's always gonna be the Planescape Torment, and it's always gonna be Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines. Like those games made such an amazing impression on me, and in a way, the Bloodlines was one of the inspirations for Cyberpunk 2077, right? And it's just, it will always probably stay as my inspiration. Such an incredible game, released I think in 2004. I think it was shipped, the Bloodlines. It was completely broken. I remember when I was playing it, majority of the quests didn't work. You had like people falling through the floor, numerous quests you couldn't finish. Like you were going, I remember, into like numerous locations. You were like falling through the ground. It was like so much stuff was broken. It was crashing constantly. I loved it. The thing was like this game showed me that what good design looks like. How
Right.
good design looks like. I was mind blown by that shit. So anyway, just a glimpse. Like those are the inspirations that I really love. When it comes to movies, I don't know, 12 Angry Men, movie from I think 1967, a movie about 12 guys sitting in the one room. That's the whole action, and it's about people. It's about the judicial system in US. It's actually, they are basically people that have to discuss and figure out if this man or who's actually a teenager, if he's actually should be sentenced or not. And that is really the conversation between them, and about their motivation, and really like about the human being, an insight into human being really made a everlasting impression on me. So yeah, 12 Angry Men, another movie, amazing one. It's about the Mozart and Moliere, and it's Amadeus. I think it's a movie from 1984, if I remember correctly. Incredible movie about like Mozart and Salieri, who is like another composer who's sort of very envious about this guy. And it's about their, in a way, competition, but competition seen through the eyes of Salieri, because the thing is like Mozart is so high up there that this guy cannot even get there. He cannot even reach him in any way. And it's kind of like the story about him sort of seeing that. And, again, it's a story of how he died and, what happened in his life. I'm talking about Mozart here. Anyway, I think like those would be couple of games, couple of movies, couple of books, man, that sort of inspired me, left like mark on my brain.
Right.
And as you hear, like those are all, like mostly those are old things. In most cases, really old things. Like the newest is really the Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines.
Yeah. No, those are amazing inspirations. I'm gonna have to take a deeper dive into the ones that I'm not familiar with, but those are.
Sure.
Thank you so much for
Yeah.
that insight. Kind of a similar question, but what are your biggest cyberpunk inspirations? Is there a standout? When were you introduced to the genre? Were you one of those devs that were playing the tabletop consistently as a teenager, or maybe a young adult? Let's hear about that.
Oh, I mean, it's an interesting question. So I actually did have been introduced to cyberpunk pen and paper when I was a teenager. So shorter story, like just after I got a computer and I played first Vampire the Masquerade video game, not the Bloodline yet, but the first one. I loved it so much that I got the pen and paper book. And I started playing the pen and paper Vampire the Masquerade, the World of Darkness one. And I really loved it. And that actually got me into pen and paper games. And in my village, I was running a session with like a couple of my friends and just writing the sessions for them. This actually helped me so much with storytelling, with just, acting as a character and so on, with
Yeah.
planning the sessions. I love that stuff. I honestly love that. So I started from Vampire. Cyberpunk was the second one. Those were actually sort of two systems in a way that I really liked. The Cyberpunk I was playing a bit less with a different sort of like set of people, but I really loved Cyberpunk as the one that was really inspiring and intriguing and different for me. Like this is what I loved about Vampire, the dark world and all of those powers that we can have, and same was for Cyberpunk, because like for me fantasy. So like let's say the traditional D&D was a bit too generic. I always felt it's just a bit too generic. It's just a bit too like, I would say normal. Like I kind of like always felt about it like it's Lord of the Rings, it's Tolkien, it's this like fantasy-ish story that about like so many books that I read was just like some kind of a fantasy about something. I don't know. I read majority of Conan the Barbarian books when I was a kid because I really liked them. I read a lot. I read really a lot of fantasy at that time. I absolutely loved it. But a lot of it just felt like a generic fantasy, and because of that, like both Cyberpunk and Vampire were like huge things that kind of like stayed in my memory. And this is how I remember that time, So this is when I was introduced to that, and just like trying to figure out building the sessions, for my players, figuring out what they do. They always fucking did everything that I didn't assume that they will do. I had to like improvise and figure out, how to do that. So this was my introduction, actually. This is how I got to know the original pen and paper books, especially the Screwheads book, and then the Night City one, and then the Solo Handbook, I think it was called. And there was like a couple other with like an actual like stories that you could play, like Never Fade Away, that you could play, and all of those, from pen and paper original book. So that was really like the way how I was introduced to that. And then like one thing that I really loved and I really liked was the Ghost in the Shell specifically, but even before that, Cowboy Bebop. Actually, like Cowboy Bebop was my first, like I would say probably sort of a movie and anime inspiration when I saw the Cyberpunk on a screen, like actual story. So Cowboy Bebop was the one that I was really amazed by like creativity of it and just by this unique atmosphere of that story. I couldn't understand so much of it, because like I thought that as a kid who was coming from like Polish mountains, and I was like Neon, I have to tell you, like, and I have to be honest, like as a kid, I felt so behind other kids. I seriously felt I'm fucking dumb. You know what I mean? I felt that I'm just dumb and I'm just not keeping up with everyone. So I was just reading books all the time, and people keep talking around me about music they listened to, about movies they saw, and I had never access to that stuff. So I kind of felt dumb. You know what I mean? And when I was watching Cowboy Bebop, I felt that there's so much like richness of the culture that is there that I don't understand.
Right.
I saw it, but I just didn't understand it. You know what I mean? There was so many references, like both American, Japanese culture that, Cowboy Bebop is this blend in a way, right? I just didn't know any of that, right? Because from where? Like, I knew it only from the books mostly, because I grew up with no internet, almost no computer, right? So that was it. So like, I felt that there's just this wonderful world that I have no access to in a way. So it really intrigued me, and like my entry was through that. But also I need to like bring up something else. Like it was in a similar time, but I think it was slightly earlier. It was Richard Morgan and his Modified Carbon, his books basically. Like, so I absolutely love this. Love the books of his, and again, so because of what I read that, about like getting your sleeve, and people entering people's bodies and all that stuff was so inspiring to me. So I read that, I saw the the Cowboy Bebop, and that sort of like get me going. And then when I already had computer, when I was studying, and I was already in Warsaw, right? So my eyes opened, and I saw all this world, and I was like, holy fuck, there's so much to learn, so much to see. Then I got to know Ghost in the Shell, right? Like the original one, then the series, then another one, then there was a remake recently, right? Then there was the Netflix series, from the Modified Carbon again. So all of that stuff just kind of like sort of started building it up, one after another. But I think the biggest catalyst really was the fact that I heard that CD PROJEKT bought the license, right?
Yes.
And I was already in the CD PROJEKT at that time. When they bought the license, I just started reading, right? I just started reading, like, especially like all of the things that Mike Pondsmith wrote for original 2020. Like, I've read most of the things he read. Now, he wrote, I don't think I can say I remember everything, because I cannot, obviously. It's just way too much.
So much.
But I close to everything, honestly. And at that time, sorry, and of course, I forgot to mention, it's just so much stuff. But in the same time, way before I joined CD PROJEKT, I was reading the Sprawl trilogy, of course, William Gibson, right?
Yes.
And I loved that. I didn't understand so much. I was like, wow, this is so wild, right? But because I loved Jacek Dukaj and, the Black Oceans, as I mentioned, the book, and there's like so many points of connection for me that I was like, this is so insane, right? So I read the whole Sprawl trilogy, then I read the Burning Chrome, of course, and I got into like just that side of things. Then I read the Eden, the manga, because I think it has like 1,000-something pages. I think the whole thing, because I think it has 14 tomes or 13 tomes, if I'm correct, the Eden. So I read that. So anyway, it was just me. Like, when I was studying, I was just slowly getting to that world and slowly getting to learn all of those things. And then went to the project. I was into the project when I learned that they obtained the license. Then I actually went back to the books, to the actual source.
Right.
That was also the time when I read the original Hardwired. The book by Walter. Oh God, I forgot his name. I'm sorry. Forgot the author's name, but you probably know which one. I mean, like the book that really inspired Mike Pondsmith in a way to really write the pen and paper, right? So I read that one. So it was just like a lot of, in a way, just slowly trying to crunch. By crunching, I mean like by biting, so small crunch through all of that layers of culture that I had no access to before. Sure. And just learn all of those things. Anyway, literally made me love that world.
That's amazing. Yeah, that leads me perfectly into actually my next question. We're talking about CD Projekt. So how did you land a job at CD Projekt? Were there other studios that you held in high regard after you kind of understood what the game dev world looked like? And would you have wanted to be at any of them, or CD Projekt was the number one? And obviously, because they have the license for Cyberpunk now, that probably inspired you, and you were already there at that point, right? So
yes, I mean, to be honest, Neon, I always wanted to work in CD Projekt. That was like my dream. Like, when I sort of like, I heard about this company like publishing games. I bought Baldur's Gate from them, right? Because CD Projekt was the company that at first was doing the publishing and localization, right? They were doing the localization because, like, for me at the time, English was just a bit too difficult yet to completely understand everything and read and really play in English, right? I could read the book in English because I could play slower and stuff, but in the game, it was still too difficult. So they were doing the Polish version of the games, Baldur's Gate 1, 2, and Planescape Torment, that I really loved. And so I knew about them. And then, it was like, 2001 or 2002 when they started thinking about working on The Witcher, and the moment when they set up the studio, I think it was 2004, right? 2002 was the time when they set up the CD PROJEKT studio. And when the first news was published about The Witcher, it was like 2003, I think. So that was the time, and then I heard about these guys I was buying games from, the localized games from, that they are doing the book that I loved so much that when I read it, I was like, holy shit, I really want to, like, I would love to work there, And then, I started reading everything about them, and I figured that they have writers, that have quest designers, that they're really just, they just employ people that make story for The Witcher 1. And I was like, holy shit, I would love to work there. So this is when really, like, when I was like 19, 20, 21, this was the time when I was already studying, and I started doing first work towards actually starting to be a quest designer and a writer for the games. And at first I really wanted to be a writer. I joined like a very small, because that was the time Neon then in Polish industry, because Americans were like one generation ahead, because the computers were older, were like in America already game dev was so much more developed than in Poland. But in Poland, especially, it was a bit younger, like I would say, industry. But also, like I didn't know so many things about it, right? So I was just learning too. And I remember, like at that time, it was something that we called the demo scene. Maybe you heard about it, or like demo scene was basically like people that were trying to like on floppy disk on Amiga and like very first computers, because we didn't have Macintosh like on that side in Poland, right? Maybe we did, but they were extremely rare to get them, right? So we were actually like doing the first coding and playing on like first Amiga computers and so on, and Ataris and stuff. So that was something that was called the demo scene, and it was basically in Europe and definitely in Poland. And in demo scene, what it was, you were trying to make a small demo of a small project where basically in like as little kilobytes as you could, you were trying to code like a graphics or a music, basically something that was happening. Sometimes it was interactive, sometimes it was not. So there was a time of a demo scene sort of slowly dying off at the end of 80s and beginning of 90s. And then in 90s, it still kind of existed, but then the first like sort of indie scene started appearing. First, like people started trying to look into making actual games, and that was the time when I was like the brink of being 19, 20, when I actually got in contact with like a couple of guys actually who were doing like a game the game was called New Dawn. It was like, of course, an open world RPG. It was an RPG, not an open world RPG, because they were not the thing at the time, but it was an RPG, of course, a post-apocalyptic one, but not like Fallout. Not like Fallout. Anyway, we were just kids. I think we were just teenagers trying to build something. We're like 19, 20, most of us. But there was the time in Neon that actually I learned so much, because I was a writer and a quest designer in that team. And my job was to write a story for the whole game and write all the quests for the whole game. And there was like a few other people there as well. And I was just sitting there and writing. And Neon, every single day, I was writing a quest. That was my objective. Every single day, no matter if it's a weekend, if it's a Christmas, no matter what it is, if it's a day off or not, I was every day sitting down writing one quest. It could be a small one, but it was one quest from beginning to the end. And then for like 2 years, I kept writing every single day a quest for them, and I was just publishing them. So the whole team saw what I was just publishing, and I learned so much. And many years later, when I was in CD PROJEKT, I figured that they do it exactly the way I was doing it myself, because like the way I kind of thought how to do that, it like through trial and error, I got to the point that it was very similar. It was very similar. There were differences, sure. The IP specifically, because it was not The Witcher, it was something else, what we were doing, but still it was very similar, at the time. So anyway, I was writing all that stuff, and that really gave me enough experience, enough knowledge, to start implementing things, learning on their own in-house engine. And we were working remotely. Nobody was paying us, right? I still have some, probably some screenshots and stuff that were never published, of that thing, what we were doing. And the thing is that that gave me enough knowledge to sort of like land my first job in an actual game dev. And that was in Metropolis Software Studio. And that was a studio that was they already published a couple of games in their history. They published Gorky 17. And they were working on the game, the shooter called Day. And they were bought by CD PROJEKT. So in that way, Metropolis Software became a part of CD PROJEKT. But man, then it was really complicated. But at that time, CD PROJEKT was working on the port of Witcher 1. I think it was a company from France called Widescreen Games. They're working on this. And I don't know the full story because I wasn't part of that. But basically, all of those things that were happening, they led to really huge financial crisis into the project at that time. And there was a time when a lot of people have been let go. A lot of people have been let go, and that whole project has been closed. And I was one of them. I was one of them. And that was the time when I was like, okay, after that, and I was working as a designer slash QA at that time, right? So I was learning some design, some level design, some QA. I was just doing everything that was needed at the time because it was a smaller studio. And man, at the time I was crushed. I was like, holy fuck, what I'm supposed to do with myself, what to do now. There's no job. I don't have any place to go. And there I found another studio, Polish studio in Krakow. I found in Krakow, so big Polish city, I found another studio called Reality Pump. And they were the guys that did actually legendary games. They did a game called Earth 2140 and 2150. Those are like RTS games that actually, like, when we had a computer in home, my father really loved those games, and I really loved them too. And those guys actually released an RPG called Two Worlds. And they were working on a game called Two Worlds 2 right now, second part. And it was actually semi-open world RPG at the time. And they were looking for someone who could be a quest designer. And I already had so much writing experience. I had some actual game dev experience at the time. And basically they said that they cannot pay me well. I said, like, I will work for almost nothing, and I'll prove you that I can be useful, because I was desperate at the time. And that was the only way. I wouldn't get this job otherwise, I think. And I told them, you can pay me like almost nothing, and I will be working for you. So they did, and they hired me. And after a month of work there, I got the first salary bump, because they were like, okay, we want to keep this guy. So I got the first small salary bump. It was way too little to even have enough money for food for a month, but it was fine. It was fine. I was like, okay, I'll keep going. So I was actually reviewing books and comic books to just like survive at that time, for one of the magazines, because like I didn't have money otherwise. So I was doing it at nights, while days I was working. And and then we released Two Worlds 2, and I was a quest designer there, and I became a lead of the team. From being the lowest paid guy in the team, I became the lead of the quest team and of the writing team, because there was the same team. It was 4 of us. We shipped Two Worlds 2. It was actually really fun. It was a good game. It actually sold a lot of copies. It was a huge hit, especially in Germany. We sold like 3 million copies. And have in mind, that was 2010. It was 2010, I think. So, at that time, 3 million copies in Germany, it was a really decent numbers. Yeah. It was decent numbers, at that time. So it was a huge hit. So we were doing an expansion, Pirates of the Flying Fortress. That one was even better, actually. It sold really well, and everything was going well, actually. But, I was still dreaming to go back to the project, right? And that was the time when they shipped Witcher 2. I played Witcher 2. After I finished, like, the Pirates of the Flying Fortress, the expansion, I played The Witcher 2, and I was fucking mind blown. And I was like, dude, I want to work so much on this game. It's still The Witcher. It's still CD PROJEKT. I know they fired me, but maybe they changed their minds now. Maybe I will be, I'm back after 6 years. I'm so much better now. I was the lead of the team. Maybe they'll try. And and throughout that time, I kept applying. And after sixth attempt, they asked me, okay, come over to the studio, make a test. I did a test. They asked me, okay, come over to the studio. Let's see. So I came over to the studio. I had the talk with Adam Badowski. We were supposed to talk for like 30 minutes. We talked for 4 hours. Adam stayed with me till it was like 8, 9 in the evening. We sat down and we kept talking about games and plans and everything. And it just I was so mind blown. Like CEO of the head of the studio at the time, game director, sitting with me and just chatting about all of those things. And he's fine, and I'm just some fucking rando who just by some reason ended up there. And I'm just talking with him. I was so mind blown. And again, I will have eternal respect for Adam for this, that he just stayed with me and just talked with me about this. Really insane to think of. but anyway, and we finished that. I had this conversation. I got hired. I got hired as a specialist, and then I worked on the Witcher 2 Enhanced Edition. So I was able to like help bug fixing Witcher 2, play testing it. I was learning from my fellow designers. I couldn't contribute much for the new content for the Witcher 2 because it already was there. The Enhanced Edition was being made, and again. Enhanced Edition got new quests, but I knew too little, especially about the technical side, so I couldn't do it. But I was learning, I was just trying. I was play testing stuff. We shipped the Enhanced Edition; it was good, and then we started Witcher 3. And yeah, on Witcher 3, I became a senior. Then I became a lead from, Hearts of Stone and Blood and Wine. Then I led the team throughout Cyberpunk 2077, and then became a director. And I got open world and cinematic departments. So like over 60 people, and and then we shipped Phantom Liberty, and that's where we are today.
Wow, that is an inspirational level of resiliency there. Holy, you've really been through it all, hey?
I mean, I don't think I even had it that tough, to be honest. Like everything was going quite smoothly. Maybe outside of getting fired by CD PROJEKT.
Sure.
That probably wasn't that smooth.
It's a testament to your hard work, right? You're writing every day for these quests. You had this thing in mind, this thing that you envisioned that you wanted to be in, and you made it happen.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's
it was
amazing.
Also like, I mean, Neon, it was also like just fucking fun, man. It was
Sure,
just
yeah.
fun to just like sit down and just do that stuff, right? Like I was just a kid who was like, like living on a farm, as I said, like working with my parents, with my brothers. So like I didn't know the other world, right? Like so for me to think of that I could do that was just like unthinkable. It was
Yeah.
like next level. Like you know what I mean? It was like a ticket out of poverty. It was just
Fair,
so
yeah.
it was just so unthinkable that I could even think of that.
And at the same time, you're like honoring your inner child, right? Because this is something that you've wanted since
Yeah.
childhood. So like you're
Yeah.
playing every day. It's like less work for you. I'm sure there are times where it gets stressful and hard, of course. But
Yeah.
you're honoring that inner child, which is amazing. I love that. Okay, I want to jump to some more cyberpunk specific questions
Sure,
about
sure, sure,
development.
sure.
So this is a good one. When developing cyberpunk, how does having so much to pull from in terms of the source books differ from pulling ideas from a novel, like in the case with The Witcher? What are the advantages and disadvantages of this, and how do you know it's valuable to pull from Mike Pondsmith's work versus what you should leave behind?
Wow, that is a deep one. That is a deep one. Okay, so it's unfortunately really long, but I'll try to answer it briefer than so far. But it's a fascinating topic, and I think like there's so many, I would say, studios that really struggle with like adapting things properly, because like I think what you have to recognize when you are reaching out to the source, which is like Sapkowski in his books or Mike Pondsmith and his pen and paper handbooks, you need to like recognize what is the IP that you're actually making and what is the identity of that IP, and what is the spine of it, what it's about, what is the core, what is the soul of it. You really, really need to understand it well. And I think like for us, it was so much easier to do it with The Witcher because sort of like we're all Polish people in a way. Well, we were at the time, right? Right now, it's a half of the team is Polish, half of the team is like 44 other nationalities. But
Wow.
the thing is that we were all really like Polish. So for us, it was much easier to just go in and sort of understand it. But I think, Neon, it was a good training to like sort of understand what those books are about, what is very unique about them, and then we could sort of apply similar methodology to Mike Pondsmith's work, which by a lot of ways was much more difficult actually, because like we were not from that culture, right? Like for us to understand cyberpunk, it was much harder. It was much harder to get there, right? So all of that, I would say, training that we did on The Witcher was very useful, to sort of apply it. And there's this method that I'm teaching my designers that is called deconstruction. And deconstruction is a way for you when you're studying a culture, a movies, a books, is a way to look into a piece of art and deconstruct into pieces and understand what is the genre, what is the theme, of the story that you're telling? What are the components and elements of that? And through the construction, we are really like, I think like one of the reasons why we actually do our stories so well is because we use the construction to really understand, a given IP, to really understand what it is about, and to really be able to focus on this. I mean, to be focused on the proper right elements of that given story. And I think like this is probably the most important, I would say, element of that, how that the construction is used. So Neon, through that, we actually reach these moments of actually understanding, okay, this is why this works, this is why this doesn't, And I think like maybe like trying to give you the shorter answer, and then we can dive into details if you want to. Like, I think we are surrounded by so much generic stuff, really. Like, so much fantasy, so much like science fiction and all that. It's just really generic things. They're just like, they're like you sort of like take it because like it's always been there. Like I think like, let's say elves are a great example of that. You have like, yeah, it's fantasy, you have elves, right? But how elves are actually done in Witcher is so unique, right? Because it actually, elves are addressing the issue of relocation of refugees, right? Of one sort of a nation being pushed out by another, right? And by this hatred between ethnicities in a way, right? This is such a unique take, on elves and ethnicities in Witcher. And that is this iconic, unique take that pretty much no other, I would say, fantasy has, So it's this thing that you really like as a designer, as a developer, you need to really be looking into the given IP and think about its soul. What is its soul? What is important? It's so easy, Neon. It's so easy to look at Star Wars, to look at what else? Mass Effect, right? Like any other prominent, any other prominent hard science fiction. Look at Modified Carbon and be like, yeah, let's borrow this, let's borrow that, let's borrow this, and put it all into Cyberpunk. And then you're like, yes, and you're diluting it. You're losing the identity, the heart of it, right? It's so important. Like, it's really trivial sometimes, right? Why in Cyberpunk we don't have this many holograms? Because holograms naturally are associated by you as an audience with Star Wars. This is where you have so many holograms. That's why through our Cyberpunk, when you go through the world, you do have them here and there, but they are there because otherwise it wouldn't be realistic. It wouldn't be believable. It would be weird if they are not there. But it's not that Cyberpunk is all about holograms. Sure, there are neons, and neons are in the world, and I think this is a very important element of Cyberpunk and Cyberpunk's visuals. But the holograms, as they are, they're not really a core part of this identity. So what I'm trying to tell you is, like, I'm giving you a very basic example of something that it can be really a trap. It can be really a trap, and it's like you really need to be so conscious and self-conscious about the identity of the IP and be like, yeah, okay, the holograms, I could take it, but it's a trap. It's a trap because, okay, I take holograms. The next thing, let's say I take re-sleeving from, Modified Carbon. Then I take a cloning, from Star Wars. Then I take, and suddenly the Cyberpunk starts losing its identity and its uniqueness. You know what I mean? Like, that's why we come up with the idea of a personal link. For instance, the cable that you have in your arm, because it's so different. It's something that is connected to the cyberware, something connected to me. It's physical. It's in a way kind of dirty and down to the world and down to the ground. It's cables. And I really love cables in Cyberpunk. Like, I think like Cyberpunk is really all about cables. And again, I know it sounds really silly when you think about like this, but it is, and that's why, like, so often in important scenes in Cyberpunk, you connect, right, with personal link to things, right? When Placidus is, sort of interrogating you and then infecting you, right? He asks you to connect with your personal link, right? There are those elements that we play with very consciously, right? It's not that he sends you that through Wi-Fi. Of course, sometimes we do have to use that, because it wouldn't be believable in that world if some form of connection like this, some form of a phone doesn't, does not work, and so on. But we are always extremely careful with those elements. So I think, Neon, that's the answer. Recognizing the identity of the IP and using the deconstruction to get there, and also being very aware of the traps that come from borrowing from other like IPs and kind of making diluted. I think this is really the whole sort of mystery that is behind, like, in a way, recognizing like what is the given IP and how it works. I think this is really the core of it.
Yeah, it's not just about throwing a bunch of cool shit in a pot and stirring it up, right? It's a recipe. You need to add a pinch of salt here and this and that. And retaining the soul, I mean, that's an important part of it. And I think you guys have done an excellent job in your game so far of retaining that soul of the source material and adding what needs to be added, and then being careful about, like you said, things like holograms. So I think that's amazing.
Yeah. And in the same time, I think you touched an excellent point, Neon, just a moment, because like in the same time, we need to grow. Right, we need to grow the IP. Right, we cannot just do what was there. Right, when we did Phantom Liberty and we did spy thriller, it wasn't something that was maybe like in the center of a cyberpunk as a genre and as a themes. What we did, but we felt that it's close enough that we could like expand it slightly. That it will stay still. It will still stay as cyberpunk. It will feel like cyberpunk, but we will expand it a bit. You know what I mean? So recognizing that what is natural and what you can do and what you cannot is really, really sometimes difficult and really dangerous, to do. But I think it's really doable. I think it's really doable. You can find those fresh elements in your stories. And again, like, I mean, I can tell you so much more if you're interested, but like it's recognizing the genres, it's recognizing the themes, right? If you're looking into like if you're looking into Phantom Liberty, it's the genre is a spy thriller, but the theme is like the individual versus authority, right? When you look in Witcher 3, and then you have the Blood and Wine and Hearts of Stone, like Hearts of Stone is really the deal with the devil is the whole like theme of that. But then the genre is really like the oh god, I forgot the name of it. Yes, it's a story about manners. It's a type of a literature, old kind of literature, right? Where you have all of those stories, and on one way, and in the in Hearts of Stone, you have elements of thriller, you have elements of comedy as well in the wedding. So like recognizing what genres work, with themes work, it's incredibly important. Like I think the Blood and Wine is an interesting one, right? Because it's chanson de geste. This is what the genre is. So chanson de geste is this old type of a French tale about knights, who are doing virtuous achievements in a way, fighting monsters, protecting their lady, fighting with the colors of their lady on their armor, all of that, So this is what actually Blood and Wine is chanson de geste, and we sort of like look for this very unique elements of genres, of themes that we can use and that we can have implanted inside that IP, that it still works, but it's still fresh and feels new, but it's still the same, it's a difficult feat, but I think it's doable, and you can always find those things, things that fit but retain that soul.
Right. Yeah, no, that does sound like quite a difficult undertaking, but I mean, it's paid off so far, in my opinion, and a lot of players' opinions as well. So that's awesome.
I'm glad to hear. Yeah.
Okay, let's jump to another question here. So, how did Cyberpunk 2077's base game story evolve? How was it pitched? What did that look like? Was it a bunch of designers and writers sitting around? Like, what does that look like from a game dev perspective for people who don't know, like myself? What does that kind of look like?
Okay, so actually, to answer this question, I need to tell you a bit about our pipeline of creating the screenplay or the stories, actually, because this is what it is. So, Neon, at first, actually, it's always that a bunch of directors decide on the pillars of the project. So what this game is going to be about. And in most cases, we're trying to put it down into write it down in like a couple of pages of text. So you have a rough description what the game is going to be first. So what you are aiming for with that project. When you have that, then you are actually moving on to the part of working on a story, or sometimes you do it in the same time. And what you start with is normally you start with various pitches, and the pitch is normally very short. It's sometimes a couple sentences where the story is going to be, and that's really it, you know. But then when you have a couple of ideas for various pitches, couple of ideas of exciting things, and again, it's a couple of directors only, because like you need to talk in a pretty limited group. Otherwise, it's impossible to find a common ground. So you need first like a couple people, like key stakeholders, as we say, to just sort of set that direction. And then you start working on that story outline, you know. And the story outline, Neon, is a description of in a prose of what story is going to be. So an example, Witcher 3 and Cyberpunk, both were like below 20 pages of text story outline. It was just the description of like what's going to happen roughly one after another without going much into detail. Those were not quests yet. You know, there wasn't majority of the big storylines haven't been there. You know, story about Panam wasn't there. Story about Judy wasn't there. Story about Carrie River. None of that was there. There was just a hint about main story. But what's important in the story outline, you need to hit the important pieces of the story, the hook or the beginning, you know, the climax, the endings, like that stuff needs to be there at least in a rough form. And this is what you write down, like the story outline, and then you iterate it together with directors, and with the writing team. Now, when that is at that level and you already have something, then you basically give it to the quest designers. And in this case, it's normally me who's taking care of that. So quest director or quest lead is dividing that story into pieces, and the single paragraphs are becoming quests. And then quest designers are basically given that pieces, and their job is to expand that piece and rewrite it to become a full story. So we'll just give you an example, for instance, Bloody Baron from The Witcher 3. That's the one that I wrote and implemented. And of course, you know, there was a lot of impact here from Marcin Blaha, our amazing narrative director, who gave a seed for that story, and Karolina Stachera, who wrote the dialogues. But I was writing the design, right, of that quest. And what it was, the story outline of that quest, Neon, was, it basically said that Geralt meets Baron, who tells him to kill a monster, and for that he gives Geralt information about Ciri. That was the whole outline about that whole Bloody Baron storyline, and everything else was actually written by me when I was actually diving deeper into that story and writing the quest design. You know, the domestic violence story and everything about that. And same goes for, like, for instance, the pickup, right? Another my quest, this time from Cyberpunk 2077, right? The whole outline of the story was that V and Jackie are going to meet Royce in the Maelstrom factory, that in basically the gang's lair, to obtain the Flathead. And that was it. That was the whole story outline for that quest. So when you're given that story outline as a designer, that normally is very general, is just a direction, right? And you just need to make sure that like ending and the beginning kind of match. So what happens then, Neon, is that we have sort of like a triangle between quest designer, writer, and cinematic designer. So the bouncing ideas off together in that small group around that quest. But quest designer's job is to write that screenplay, write that design. And the end of that process is a moment when you have this whole written screenplay. It doesn't contain dialogue yet. It's just the events, everything that happens. But what's important is that you have all of the elements of the game there already. So first, gameplay elements there are described there. You know, first locations, like everything is in that quest design described exactly as it happens on the screen as you move basically through the game one bit after another. And then we start implementing, you know, then basically the content teams, so basically multidisciplinary teams that are focused around that triangle of people who are working on a story. This team is Neon working on the quest, you know, and first they work on a draft. draft is something that we call first playable. So that is a stage of the quest where really on a blockout location, you sort of like implement the first really dirty version of that quest that you can run almost like from beginning till the end, hit all the key main points, and it works. And then you start filling those certain spots with content. You start writing the scenes, actually the actual dialogue, the actual characters. And so when you start filling things up, then you talk to your artists about, the locations, how they look like. You talk to character artists about the looks of the characters. So the characters are drawn and then modeled, the gameplay is being iterated. So slowly all of the components are being made, and then you slowly implant them into that quest. And then you move on from like pre-alpha to pre-beta to beta, and then you polish it up and then you ship it. And then you patch it afterwards when some issues, if any issues are discovered. That's a normal sort of pipeline,
Okay, and that's all over the span of a few years, of course, right? Like, how long does that take?
In case of AAA, it's minimum couple of years, of course. Especially AAA RPGs, because RPGs are a large project, right? So, in most cases, it's just a couple of years of work that it takes to actually produce a project like this. When you have a linear game, action game or so on, you can maybe scale down to like 3 years. We see like I don't know, Insomniac that recently just shipped Spider-Man 2, right? That they were able to do in like 3 years or so. Like I don't know exactly how long development was, but that's roughly the time. So because like when you don't change this much, you don't rewrite this much, rework this much, you have a similar-ish structure and you just make the content, it's a bit easier to do that. So it really depends on the project and the scope of your project,
Okay, makes sense. Very interested in asking you this question. So many people don't know that you hold a master's in psychology. How does this influence your design philosophy or perspective when it comes to telling impactful and emotional stories?
Oh, Nian, this is such a fascinating topic. I mean, to be honest, like I think like because like I have two masters, actually, journalism and psychology, and I started actually because I really wanted to be a writer and write for games. So I went there because that was the closest. Because like again, when I started, there was no game dev studies. You couldn't study game dev; it didn't exist. So like the closest thing I could do, I started journalism, and when I was studying that, I actually had classes from psychology, and that was so fascinating. Like every single week when I was going for that classes and on lectures, I was just amazed. So I started reading like books about psychology and so on, and first like introduction to psychology and so on. And it was so incredible. So I felt, okay, I really want to study this. So when I was almost finishing up my master's in journalism, I went in and started basically a second master on psychology. And man, it was the best decision in my life. I seriously loved it so much. It was so fascinating. And again, I never studied to be a psychologist. I never studied to be a therapist. I didn't want to. I wanted to make games. So I studied really to just learn, how to make better games. And that was really my full motivation. I never believed that I'm going to be a psychologist at all. That was never something I had in mind. And like, really honestly, like when you are working on games, one of the primary things that you're using to tell your stories are characters. You are telling your stories through the characters. And again, CD PROJEKT, like we are probably really the best. Like if you look at what we do best as a studio, it's probably characters, really. Like that is probably one of the best things. Like so there's so many discussions that we are having almost daily about like how characters should look like, how their behavior should look like, what they should do, how they should act, on the level of their behavior, on the level of what they say, like on the level of their motivation. We constantly talk about this. So this is so incredibly valuable. But Neon, there's also another layer of that. I'm also a manager. I have big teams. Like my quest team at first was like 10 people, then grew to 50, then grew to 22 people, then 24 people, which is like right now. And the thing is, Neon, that I I have to manage people like when I got off also like open world team and cinematic team. Those are teams that are almost 20 people teams, so 60, almost 60 people, over 60 people teams. There's so much management involved, so much like social interactions, communication, all of those things that are actually incredibly useful. And that training like showed me so much,
Right.
and just helped me out when it comes to soft skills and hard skills actually. So like it's on two levels, I would say. Like it's a use when you're actually designing the characters, and it's a use also in daily life. And it's interesting because like when you're in game dev, especially in like storytelling in any narrative, you will find out that psychologists are probably like a half of the employees. Are like writers are actually are educated psychologists, quest designers, open world designers very often are just psychologists. And that's the case for us. We have couple psychologists in pretty much every team at this point.
Wow. That
Yeah.
is that is fantastic. Yeah, no, that was just something that was a question I had. I mean, we don't really talk about your education. I haven't seen interviews where
Hmm.
people are mentioning, that aspect of it. So I was just curious to see how that's infused
Yeah.
into your work. But okay, let's jump to the next one here. What advantages did releasing the base game have on Phantom Liberty's development? I know it was started before the base game's development, but did you guys heavily pivot on feedback from the story of the base game? Obviously, 2.0 gameplay changes came with player feedback, of course, but how did the story kind of adapt based off of feedback?
Yeah, I mean, man, it was the same really. It was
Yep.
the same for gameplay, like it was for the story really. Like we knew that players were like unhappy with certain things, certain choices that we have made. They appreciate one things but didn't appreciate another choices and so on. So that was all taken into account. And when you look into Phantom Liberty story, I hope you can see it because god damn it, I believe me, I tried. And other people obviously as well. Like there's just so many things, when you look at Phantom Liberty, there is the structural differences that are there. Like there are clear moments, for instance, just one of the examples, there are clear moments that we sort of count down the action so that you as a player, you can feel fine and justified to just go to open world and do stuff, right? There are moments when you even asked to do the open world. There are moments when we just try to blend as much open world as we can with main story, right? The choices and consequences, right? So many players pointed out that they enjoyed what was in Cyberpunk, but they want more of that. They want more of that. There was too little
Mm,
for them, right? So we looked into this and we were like, obviously that should be there, that we should look into it. So that was one of the things that I was really pushing for both my open world designers and my quest designers, like to just please have always the choices, have always the branches. And one of the really big conclusions and important conclusions from Cyberpunk, telegraphing. We need to telegraph the choices to the player and consequences. We were so subtle in some places in Cyberpunk that players didn't realize. Like sometimes people who play like 200 hours or 1,000 hours of our games, they say, oh yeah, we clearly see that there is this different variant, that there's the different branch. But if you wouldn't play it
mm,
2 times, you wouldn't know because we weren't telegraphing clear enough.
right.
In Witcher 3, if you make a choice, you even have the flashback moment when Geralt comes in and tells you, if I would have chosen this or that, then this and that would happen, right? You have this really artificial moment of that flashback telling you exactly what happens. In Cyberpunk, we wanted to make it as diegetic, as immersive as possible, as natural as possible.
Right.
And we were so subtle. We were so subtle sometimes because we wanted to be so realistic and so natural that we went so subtle and we kind of missed the point. You know what I mean? We kind of missed the point that, wait, player made a choice. We need to make sure that the player feels that it's telegraphed that the result of what's happening is the result of they chosen. So that was a really big learning for Phantom Liberty. It
Mm-hmm.
was like, okay, we are doing telegraphing. We're making sure that we are showing all of those consequences. That's why so many times you made a choice. There is a follow-up in a form of text messages, in a form of pictures in text messages,
Right.
in a form of a quest branch. The NPC comes back. Like it's not anymore like so many, for instance, gigs in base game had this thing that you could later meet that character sitting, let's say, I don't know, Tiny Mike in Afterlife. how many people know about this, or
Right.
like other characters like that you can actually meet later. In Phantom Liberty, we telegraph that. They send you an SMS. They ask you to meet them. You go in, and then there is Bob with hot dog stand, Bill, right? Like there
Yeah.
is just always, it's always telegraphed there. Like that's what I'm saying. Like, and again, do I feel that there's better way to do it? For sure, for
Hmm.
sure.
Hmm.
I think we learned even more on Phantom Liberty, and again, those will be conclusions taken further. But like looking at this, I'm like, okay, we know how to do it better. It's just like sometimes when you don't do the same game over and over,
Right.
and you just try to do better, and you try to innovate, and you try to like bring new stuff to the table, you make mistakes,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And there were just some things that we felt that in The Witcher they were like very artificial, because of how obvious, in obvious way, they were telegraphed. So we went too far a bit with telegraphing, right? So it was just a matter of taking this into account and thinking, okay, how to do that better in Phantom Liberty. So you can see there's so many differences, right? The branches, the choices, the consequences, the telegraphing, the structure of the narrative, also the pace of the narrative. The pace of the narrative. There are moments that the story in Phantom Liberty speeds up, and you have like tension, and I don't know, whole sequence around Chimera, and so there are moments when we take you for a ride, and it's a crazy ride, and there are moments when it slows down, and then you're like, okay, player, it's completely fine if you just go now for open world and just go enjoy the open world.
Right.
It's okay. Nothing bad will happen. Just go and enjoy open world, right? Which in Cyberpunk, you could make a point, yeah, this wasn't done too well, right? Like the clock sticking, right? V is dying, right? And then there's so much of open world to do, and it's not naturally ingrained in that story, right? So again, just one of many learnings, man. So like when it comes to Phantom Liberty, like that whole thing was just learning about this. And there's even more. Like there's genre and the theme. This is a whole couple hour long lecture to just explain it well. But like what I wanted to tell you, and again, I think like players and you, because I saw it, you definitely spotted what we are doing, what we haven't done before that much. And it's again, new thing that we learned, which is that we really are trying to have a theme defined quite early and build everything around it, but also genre. We were doing variations of genre. We were doing like suddenly quests that were comedy and a tragedy and a drama and a tragic comedy and pastiche. Like we were doing those things in the past, but now we are so much more conscious and so much more deliberate, and I would say mature as a creators.
Right.
Somewhat damaged, right? When
Yes.
somewhat damage starts, you have no doubt. You have no doubt what genre that is. You have no doubt what's going on. You have no doubt what we did. And we were so incredibly focused on that. And again, here's just huge work on our directors, also my role to just make sure to remind my designers, what are you building? What are you building? Go back to original idea. Go back.
Right.
Like always just focusing them up to just make sure it's not diluted, it's not spread too much, so that they are focused on what they are building. But it's just again another learning, and when you play Phantom Liberty, you can feel it.
Right.
That genre and theme is so defined, and you can feel also that we as creators, we know what we are doing now.
Right.
We actually understand the IP so much better than we did in the past, and that's probably the last thing I want to finish on, but that list is really long. Is Neon, we understood Cyberpunk better.
Yeah.
I
I
think
mean,
we just learned IP much better.
and
We just learned
I
what
think
it
that
is.
comes across, right? And those are kind of fundamental lessons that you'll take into Orion, and it'll kind of infuse into the work that you guys do there. So
Yeah,
I'm
for
very
sure,
excited
for
to
sure.
see how those lessons translate to the next gen. Let's talk a little bit about that. What are you excited about the switch to Unreal? What kind of opportunities do you think that unlocks for Orion? When it comes to the hiring process, you're tapping into the North American pool. How do you retain that Eastern European storytelling aspect when we're having a lot more North American devs? What does that kind of look like?
Oh wow, it's a gigantic topic. I mean, so maybe I will start first from like just team composition and building. So like we are, of course, our studio and structuring the studio in a way that we have, of course, some devs and of course directors, leads and whatnot, and also devs that have been working on Cyberpunk, and we're just moving them to Boston to just work there in place. It's me, it's Gabe Amatangelo, our game director, it's Igor Sarzyński, our narrative director, a couple other people, Sarah Grimmer. Sarah is a expert quest designer in my team. She's the Judy's storyline author, for instance. So Sarah's moved already to Boston there. So this is basically our idea of retention, like how to retain that soul in a way. So like keep people that have been in a way directing before the teams and sort of had, and I would say biggest impact on like how it looks like, how it feels. We kind of keep that whole group intact, and I think like this is awesome to be honest, because like it's so important when you have a group of managers, leaders, managers who are just know each other's quirks, knows each other's strong and weak sides, know how to work with each other. And I think this is very powerful. It's really, like I would say, very understated and really unseen element of game design and game dev in general. Just retaining that sort of spine of directors and leads who can basically build around and sort of like retain that knowledge. So that's step one, second thing, of course, is the technology. So like we are working, since quite some time already at this point on Unreal. There's a lot of work to be done when it comes to the toolset specifically and so on, because there's so many, I would say, specific things that our Red engine it was tailored for. So of course, we need to make sure that all of that is in a way built properly so that we can do the games exactly the way we are that we want to do it. And the work is ongoing here. I probably unfortunately cannot go much more into detail here.
Sure.
I would say the advantages and clear advantages of Unreal are probably quite apparent. Of course, working together with Epic is a completely new thing for us. It's a challenge on one thing, but also like it's an honor. It's a huge studio. They have incredible amount of engineers, really like just very seasoned, I would say, engineers. So something that we can also learn from in that way. So I definitely see it as a huge, like I would say, on one way it's a challenge, but the challenge is I don't understand the challenge as a difficulty, but more as an opportunity. I see so much space to actually do something awesome with that. So I'm actually really looking forward to that. But there's a lot of work to be done on that front. I think like I don't think I can speak much about like Orion itself and the project because of course this is not the time and space yet. For it there will be a time when we'll be talking about this. I don't know what else would you wanted to know, because I don't know if I touched everything.
Yeah, no, that was great. The hiring process has already begun. What stage are you guys at? It's very, very early
when
on.
It comes to, yeah, I mean, well, sort of, but not completely, right? Because like we have started quite a bit of a time ago. So, as always, when you are forming a new team, at first you're starting from a director level, then lead level, then expert senior level, and then the teams, right? So we are sort of at the stage of taking care of our leads, of our directors as well, but mostly leads, and probably at some point in the future, we will start a bit more, I would say, intense hiring to fill up those senior and expert positions. So I would say that's probably as general and as precise in the same time as I can be to answer your question without going much into detail. The thing is, Neon, that when you're like in the ideation phase and pre-production phase, you don't want to also like have too big of a team, because it just complicates so many things. You just need to like to iterate vision the best way possible. You just need couple stakeholders,
right?
And it's always best to just iterate it between that group to just keep it consistent and to be on the same page, and true to the IP. I would say. So that is this is sort of like on purpose,
right.
like this.
Yeah, I can imagine you could go in a million different directions if you have too many quote unquote cooks in the kitchen there, right? So
exactly.
I think that's very valuable. Okay, I got a last question for you. Is there anything that you want to tell the Cyberpunk community, CDPR fans? You have an opportunity here. Let's hear it.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, first of all, I wanted to thank you guys for supporting us. Seriously, this was so fucking insane. Like the fact that, like, look at the reception of Cyberpunk right now, how it was turned. Look at the reviews, look at the videos, look at the discourse around the game, people talking about it, discussing the story, discussing the characters, drawing or the fan art. Absolutely love that part. And the fact that you guys come back to the game, play it again, have fun with it. So many people finish the game, finish it sometimes for the first time. Again, the sales, like we saw, like the numbers, it was just insane. Like I think like it was like what, 25 million of a base game, 3 million of a expansion. Just I think it was the first week, right? Or only because I think those numbers were coming from a first week. So those numbers are incredible. Like there's so little games that even get to that level. Like 28 million total. That is like mad. That is like mad number to even think about. So that is incredible, because that just allows us to just build more cool shit for you, and we can do our jobs, and we have money to feed our families in a way, put bread on the table, and just focus on our work, right? And build a studio, build a branch, in America, and really like build things for you. So like what I have incredible gratitude. It was fucking tough, like honestly, after
Yeah.
the release of Cyberpunk, man, it was tough. It was heartbreaking. But I mean, we kept going. And again, like people like you who have been in this community, have been supporting us for so long, making videos about this, being supportive, pointing out things that are good and things that still need to be fixed, and it still need to be improved. But being like reasonable, I would say, like that was so valuable to have people like this in the community supporting us and talking about this in a reasonable manner. And I think like that really kept us going. It kept us going together to actually really reach to the point that we can be proud of this. You cannot imagine how heartbreaking it is to feel that you have put so much work into this. You feel that it's a good game. You feel that those are good characters. It's a good story. Those are good quests. It's an enjoyable entertainment. It brings value to people's lives, and they just cannot play it because it's not good enough technically, because we have missed the mark in some things that are important, and they just cannot play it. You cannot imagine how heartbreaking that is. And it's just like and I'm so glad that we kept going, kind of fueled by the passion of, like, I would say, a fracture of community at the beginning, and then sort of slowly, like regained more and more throughout the patches, specifically 1.5, with the release on the new platforms, and then the 1.6, the Edge Runners update, and then the anime, and then 2.0, and then the Phantom Liberty, all of that stuff. Just we kept going, and it just kept growing, and it was really incredible to see. And I think like also it's also like, I think not even for us, but it's also for other devs, for other
Mm.
studios, just seeing like it's a sign of like, yeah, you can do it, like sure, Halo games and their No Man's Sky, they've shown that it's possible to do it. And I think we have shown it's possible to do it. So in a way, if you fail, like, it's the only way. The only thing that matters is like how you will be remembered, like afterwards. Will you just get up and keep going? And we kept going, and we managed to make it. And I'm honestly so proud of this team and of this community. And of this community of being here. And it's been fucking insane. Like honestly, Cyberpunk changed my life and really impacted my life in such a way. Man, I'm moving to Boston to make another one. I'm leaving my life behind
Yeah.
to just make another game for the people, for this community, because I believe in it.
Right. Absolutely amazing comeback story. You guys have worked so hard. We've seen it. The players have seen it. People are coming around to it. The discourse is changing. And I think, years down the line, people are going to look back and say this was, this is a masterpiece. I mean, it's just there narratively, technically,
Mm.
graphically. Everything is like the components are all there. We love the game. The community has been sticking by you. I see them in your streams every week. There's more and more people on Sundays now, so it's just amazing to see, and we can't wait to see what you guys create in the future, man. Just keep making cool shit is what
Yeah.
what it's all about. So Pablo, thank you so much for taking the time. I know we went over. I'm conscious of your time today. I
Thank you
know
so
you're a
much.
busy man. So thank you so much for this interview. And we'll have to do it again sometime. And I'm going to have to come bug you in Boston, or you end up, if you come to Vancouver, we'll go
Sounds
sometime.
good. Sounds good. Anytime. Thank you so much. It was a huge pleasure to talk to you, Neil.
Thank you, Pablo.